Marcus Turner, the CEO of Atlantic National Bank, had always prided himself on his professional success. As a black man, rising to the top of a prestigious institution had been a monumental achievement, but it wasn't without its challenges. Throughout his career, he had worked tirelessly to prove that his skills and determination were not defined by the color of his skin. But recently, rumors had been circulating about a troubling pattern in his bank, mismanagement and racist behavior exhibited by some of the white American staff. People outside the bank were voicing their frustrations, and Marcus felt an undeniable urge to uncover the truth for himself. He had heard whispers in the community about how black customers, particularly those who came in for personal loans or mortgage advice, were treated differently. They were met with condescension, slower processing times, or even outright dismissive attitudes. As someone who had worked hard to rise through the ranks, Marcus was determined to understand if these reports were more than just hearsay. He knew that as CEO, his authority might not be enough to expose the kind of systemic issues that could be lingering in his company. It required a closer, more intimate approach. So, Marcus came up with a plan. He would go undercover, posing as a regular black customer visiting the bank for the first time. He believed that by immersing himself in the everyday experience of his clientele, he would get a better sense of what was really going on. It was risky, he was the CEO, after all, and his disappearance might raise some eyebrows, but he was willing to take that risk. He carefully selected a day when he would slip away from his office, blending in with the crowd. Nobody would recognize him, not in the scruffy jeans and baseball cap he'd chosen to wear. On the appointed day, Marcus entered the local branch of the bank, walking through the heavy glass doors that led to the bustling lobby. The employees were busy, heads down in paperwork, and no one seemed to notice him at first. He approached the nearest teller, a woman in her 30s, with a warm smile, trying to appear as inconspicuous as possible. "I'd like to make a withdrawal, please," he said, keeping his voice calm and friendly. He handed over a bank card, carefully prepared to play his role. The teller eyed the card briefly and then looked back at Marcus. Her face barely showed any emotion as she processed the transaction. But Marcus noticed something in her eyes, a flicker of hesitation. It was subtle, but enough to make him raise an eyebrow. She began to tap away at her keyboard, but the pace was slow, almost as if she was intentionally dragging her feet. Marcus watched her closely, wondering if she was simply busy or if something more was at play. Meanwhile, other customers in line behind him were being served much more quickly. As he waited, Marcus felt the weight of the moment. He had worked so hard to create an environment of equality within his company, but now he found himself questioning everything. Was this really the reality that so many black customers had to face every day? Was it possible that he had been blind to the culture of indifference that had taken root in some of his staff? His mind raced with these thoughts as he stood there, trying to keep his composure. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the teller handed him the money. She didn't make eye contact, nor did she offer the usual pleasantries of thank you or have a nice day. She simply passed the cash across the counter with an air of indifference. Marcus, although used to dealing with all kinds of people, couldn't help but feel a pang of disappointment. This wasn't just bad customer service, it felt personal. As though he had been treated differently simply because of his skin color. He nodded politely, took the money, and walked away. But as Marcus moved toward the exit, he noticed a group of other customers lingering near the waiting area. They were a mixed group, but the majority appeared to be white. One of them, a middle-aged man, caught his eye. The man had been watching Marcus's exchange with the teller, and now he stepped forward, blocking his path. "Excuse me," the man said, his tone friendly, almost conspiratorial. "Are you having trouble with the service here, too? I don't know what's going on with this bank lately, but I'm starting to feel like they're treating people differently. I'm not sure if it's the management or just the staff, but something's wrong." The man's words struck a chord with Marcus, who hadn't expected such an open acknowledgement of the problem. He nodded, unsure of how to respond. But the man continued, "I'm just a regular customer, but I've noticed that when I come in, the staff seems so much friendlier. But when others, particularly people of color, come in, they're treated with a little less respect. It's subtle, but it's there." Marcus felt a deep sense of validation mixed with a rising anger. This was the very kind of behavior he had feared. It was all too real, and it was happening right under his nose. He thanked the man and walked out of the bank, his mind swirling with conflicting emotions. On one hand, he was heartened to hear that others were noticing the issue. But on the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of betrayal. This wasn't just about one teller or one branch, it was a systemic issue that seemed to have taken root in his organization. As the CEO, he had always believed that his leadership would create a culture of inclusivity, but now, he wasn't so sure. Later that night, Marcus sat in his office, reflecting on the day's events. His thoughts were heavy, and he found himself staring out the window at the city lights below. He had always considered himself a champion of diversity, a person who fought for fair treatment in all aspects of his life. But now, seeing the reality of how some of his staff treated black customers, he felt a deep sense of responsibility. Was he complicit in allowing this kind of behavior to persist without even knowing it? It was a difficult question, and one that he couldn't ignore. The next morning, Marcus woke up with a clear sense of purpose. He couldn't let this issue slide. He needed to address it head-on, but he also knew that confronting it in the open might not be enough. He couldn't rely solely on corporate memos or policies. He needed to engage with his staff directly, hear their stories, and understand their perspectives. But more importantly, he needed to understand why these issues had been allowed to fester for so long without anyone speaking out. With that in mind, Marcus scheduled a series of meetings with department heads and key staff members, determined to get to the bottom of the issue. He was prepared for difficult conversations, knowing that some of his employees might feel uncomfortable discussing race or acknowledging the problematic behavior within their ranks. But Marcus was ready to confront the truth, no matter how painful it might be. As the day of the meetings approached, Marcus thought back to his own journey, the obstacles he had faced as a black man in the business world, the challenges he had overcome, and the people who had supported him along the way. He knew that this moment wasn't just about him. It was about creating a better future for those who would come after him, for the customers who trusted the bank with their financial well-being, and for the staff who deserved better guidance. The first meeting was with Jessica, the head of customer service. Marcus had known her for years, and she had always come across as diligent and professional. But as the conversation began, it became clear that there was a sense of discomfort in the air. Jessica was hesitant at first, unsure of how to address the subject of race and the treatment of black customers. But Marcus's calm demeanor encouraged her to speak openly. She confessed that while she had never seen outright discrimination, she had witnessed subtle behavior from certain staff members that could be construed as racial bias. Jessica's admission was both painful and validating for Marcus. It was evident that the issues were more widespread than he had realized. He asked her how she thought the bank could create a more inclusive environment for all customers, particularly people of color. Jessica paused before replying. "We need training," she said, her voice quieter now. "We need to ensure that everyone understands the importance of equity in every interaction, not just when we talk about diversity at corporate events, but every day, with every customer." Marcus nodded thoughtfully. This was exactly what he had been missing, real, actionable solutions. It wasn't enough to rely on policies that might go ignored, it required a cultural shift, one that needed to start at the very top. He thanked Jessica for her honesty and promised that he would be introducing training and sensitivity workshops for all staff, starting immediately. But he knew this wouldn't be enough. He needed to keep digging, to understand where these attitudes came from and why they had taken root. The next meeting was with Lucas, the branch manager who oversaw daily operations. Lucas had always been a competent and reliable employee, but Marcus suspected that he might not fully grasp the extent of the issue. When Marcus broached the topic of racial bias in the workplace, Lucas stiffened. He appeared defensive, as if he had been caught in some sort of wrongdoing. Marcus kept his voice neutral, wanting to give Lucas the space to speak without fear of retribution. "I don't see it," Lucas said after a long pause. "We have a policy of treating everyone the same. We don't discriminate." Marcus could sense the unease in his tone, and he decided to press further. "But what about the experiences customers are having? What about the way they feel when they're not treated with the same respect?" Lucas shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "I haven't personally seen anything like that," he insisted. But Marcus knew this was a common defense mechanism. People often refused to acknowledge systemic issues if they hadn't directly experienced them. Marcus wasn't surprised by Lucas's response. Many people in positions of power didn't want to confront uncomfortable truths. However, this only strengthened Marcus's resolve. He reminded Lucas that the bank's success relied on every customer feeling valued and heard. "We cannot afford to turn a blind eye to what's happening outside these walls," Marcus said firmly. "I'm holding you accountable, and I expect you to do the same for your team." As the days went on, Marcus conducted more meetings. The conversations were difficult, but necessary. Some employees were defensive, others were completely unaware of the subtle biases they exhibited in their work. But every meeting, though challenging, brought to light important truths about how deeply ingrained these behaviors were. It became clear that the bank's problems weren't isolated to a few individuals. The culture of privilege and implicit bias was woven into the fabric of the organization itself. By the end of the week, Marcus had met with everyone from tellers to vice presidents. He had collected a mix of responses. Some people were willing to acknowledge the problem, others were uncomfortable with the idea that they might be complicit. But one thing became apparent: people were starting to talk. The silence that had shrouded these issues for so long was finally being broken. Marcus knew that this was just the beginning. The real work would come in the months and years ahead, as they rebuilt trust and created a more equitable workplace. Determined to take action, Marcus implemented a comprehensive diversity and inclusion training program for all staff. The sessions would focus not only on recognizing and addressing personal biases but also on understanding the history of racism in America and how it shaped interactions in business. Marcus brought in experts from outside the bank, including sociologists, psychologists, and community leaders, to lead the training. It was crucial to him that this be a holistic approach, addressing both the personal and systemic dimensions of the problem. At first, the training sessions were met with some resistance. Employees, especially the older generation, felt uncomfortable with the idea of being told how to behave or think. But Marcus was determined to make these sessions mandatory, ensuring that every single employee participated. Slowly, as the sessions progressed, the atmosphere began to shift. People started listening, asking questions, and reflecting on their actions. It wasn't easy, but there were moments when the participants shared personal stories of how they had unintentionally perpetuated harmful stereotypes or treated others unfairly. These moments of vulnerability were difficult but cathartic. Meanwhile, Marcus continued to monitor the experiences of Black customers who visited the bank. He paid special attention to how they were treated by staff and how their concerns were handled. The difference in his own interactions was noticeable. Customers who had once felt overlooked now greeted him with warmth and appreciation, recognizing him as a leader who was committed to change. For Marcus, these small victories were a reminder of why he had chosen to take action in the first place. Then, one day, an unexpected email arrived on his desk. It was from the same man who had spoken to him outside the bank during his undercover visit. The man had written to thank Marcus for the changes he had seen within the bank. "I don't know what you did, but the way you're treating people now is different," the email read. "I feel valued when I walk in, and I can tell that others do, too. It's not just about the service, it's about the respect that's finally being shown." Marcus felt a deep sense of gratitude and pride as he read the message. It was a reminder that change, though difficult and slow, was possible. It was proof that one person's actions could ripple outward and create a better future. He thought of his parents, who had always told him to stand tall, to be unapologetically himself. They had instilled in him the values of hard work, integrity, and courage. Today, those values were guiding him to make a real difference in the world. Months passed, and the bank's culture began to transform. The training had made an impact, but it was the continuous efforts of Marcus and his team that truly changed the atmosphere. Employees began to hold each other accountable for their actions, offering constructive feedback and supporting one another in their growth. The bank started to see an increase in positive customer feedback, especially from Black clients who had previously felt marginalized. It became clear that the changes had created an environment where everyone felt seen, heard, and valued. One afternoon, as Marcus walked through the bank's main lobby, he stopped and looked around. He watched as staff members greeted customers with genuine smiles, listened attentively to their concerns, and treated them with respect. The atmosphere was different now. It was one of inclusivity, kindness, and understanding. Marcus knew that the road ahead was still long, but he felt hopeful for the first time in a long while. The seeds of change had been planted, and they were beginning to grow. It was in this moment that Marcus realized the true power of leadership. It wasn't about the titles, the accolades, or the success. It was about using your position to create opportunities for others, to lift people up, and to make the world a better place. He had set out to fix a broken system, and while there was still much work to be done, he knew they were on the right path. As the sun set over the city, Marcus stood at the window of his office, reflecting on how far he had come. He thought about the many challenges he had faced throughout his career, the moments of doubt, and the times when he had almost given up. But now, he felt an overwhelming sense of pride. He had faced adversity head-on, and in doing so, he had created a bank where everyone, regardless of race or background, was treated with dignity. The journey was far from over, but Marcus was ready to continue the fight for fairness and justice, knowing that true change came from within. Thanks for watching and subscribe for more story like this.